we know the question that's going to be on the test today, tomorrow, and for the rest of your life. And that question is, so what do you do? Or some very similar question to that. And yet we know the question on the test and we don't prepare. When you know the answer to the question before you get asked, you can say it with a whole different level of confidence and panache. And when someone asks, what do you do? They're not so much selfish, but they're a little bit self-interested, or they're wondering, is the thing that you do something that could help me or someone I know or someone I love?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Community Made podcast. I'm your host, Jason Gaynard. Now, as you know, this season is all about how to grow, nurture, and amplify your business relationships. In the first few episodes of this season, I shared why relationships are the ultimate asset and how a live event back in 2011 fundamentally changed the trajectory of my life, why proximity is power and how who you surround yourself with is who you become, and why going to events can be the 80-20 of relationship building, along with a few other tips on how to get the most out of events if you're an introvert. Now, in today's episode, I'm going to share a conversation that I had with a very good friend of mine, Clay Hebert. This is not really actually a conversation, now that I think about it. It's more of a masterclass on how to introduce yourself clearly, concisely, and confidently, something that the majority of us struggle with. Introducing yourself on the fly, which I've been guilty of in the past, almost always goes wrong because you're nervous when you meet new people, and this often results in introductions being too long, too wordy, too timid, or too boastful. All of these things leave bad first impressions. And there's a few great formats to a solid introduction, and my buddy Clay Hebert created the playbook. I've known Clay for years. I mean, I love this guy. He supported us for MMT Year 1 as a speaker, has been an attendee pretty much ever since. He's the mastermind and strategist behind hundreds of successful Kickstarters over the years, and was recently named one of Entrepreneur Magazine's 50 most daring entrepreneurs, alongside folks like Howard Schultz from Starbucks, Elon Musk, and Jeff Bezos. He is by far one of my favorite people on the planet. I just adore this guy, so I can't wait to share this conversation with you. Quick side note, Clay shares a few templates that you can leverage to design and refine your own introduction. With that said, those templates can be found in the Community Made group. If you're a member, you'll find it in the resource section. If you're not a member, lucky for you, it's free. Just go to communitymade.com to get access. And a quick second side note, for fun, I decided to take some of the concepts shared in this season on how to grow, nurture, and amplify your business relationships and go deeper, taking that into a live experience by hosting a workshop. To me, nothing beats in-person experiences. And to my surprise, the first workshop, I posted it to Facebook and it sold out within like a day and a half. So I decided to schedule a second workshop. So for dates and availability on that, visit superconnectorworkshop.com. That's superconnectorworkshop.com. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, enjoy this intimate conversation with my great friend, Clay Hebert. It's not working. I need to travel with an audio guy in the future. But move your microphone just up a little bit.
Closer to me, closer to my mouth.
Right into your nose. No, I'm joking. No. That's perfect.
Cool.
So, Clay Hebert, ladies and gentlemen.
It's good to see you, man.
I guess this is our intro. I wasn't. You know what's funny? Not that I didn't respect you. Again, we had.
Not that you didn't respect me.
Let's just gloss over that. No, I've been trying to make this happen for so long, as you know. And season 2 is all about building relationships, and there's a ton that you could share on building relationships. But specifically, one area that you own in my head and in the marketplace is how to introduce yourself. You have a really great, framework for that, which a lot of our friends have used, and some of our friends have actually taken that framework and what has come out of that framework and actually trademarked it for their business and those kind of things. So I want to dig into that framework in a second, but I'm trying to remember. I mean, you're one of my dearest friends, without a shadow of a doubt. And I remember, obviously, you spoke at Mastermind Talks Year 1.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about it today. I know we connected right before MMT, so this would have been probably 2012, 2013. I'm not sure how. But one thing I do remember is that when I looked at the first post I did about Mastermind Talks, which was like, I think February 9th, 2013. So I came up with the idea that, well, not the idea, but I put myself against the wall where I'm like, I need to do this event. And that was like December of 2012. And then I was planning out the thing and I was terrified to post it on Facebook because I'm like, what happens if nobody buys tickets and this turns out to be a flop and I'm doing this publicly? And I revisited that post a couple weeks ago because I was doing a speaking engagement. And I wanted to take a screenshot and I had 14 likes. That was the official announcement of MMT. I had 14 likes. And one of the likes and one of the comments was actually from you.
Yeah.
Regardless.
I do remember where I was sitting when we had our first Skype call. I was at a co-working space, sort of in a startup accelerator incubator. I had a meeting there that day, and then I had my call with you to talk about MMT the first year. And just one of those things, you remember where you are when certain things happen. Yeah. I remember where I was sitting, where I took the Skype call in front of a big window in the Lower East Side.
I probably did it in my sad basement at the time, in despair. But I mean, since then, oddly enough, it's funny because I think I got a Facebook notification a couple days ago that it's our 5-year anniversary.
Yeah.
So we connected on Facebook.
And we're celebrating here with Bubbles.
Exactly, Topo Chico,
which
is Ryan Holiday's favorite sparkling water.
Tiny bubbles.
But yeah, I mean, again, one of my closest friends. I mean, you, God, the reputation you have amongst our peer group is nothing short of something I aspire to have one day.
You're too kind, my friend.
You are definitely the type of individual who will drop your own projects, as you know, to support others with theirs. And you came out to support us with MMT Year One, where you did a talk on. I guess gatekeepers, and Kickstarter, and basically all the gatekeepers are gone. And then you've been back at MMT many years since. You did a fantastic talk with Joey Coleman, which I hope gets out there to the world.
Yeah,
called Carpe Defect.
That was a lot of fun. And I did Perfect Intro that same year.
You did, yeah.
Just a short one, just like a 10-minute quick up and down. But
so I don't know. Have you listened to podcasts?
Yeah.
Honestly,
yeah, totally. It's in my
What's
Overcast.
your favorite episode? The one with Michael Jordan.
Jordan Axiani. No. Let's see.
I won't put you on the spot.
Yeah, no.
But
no, it's great. I love it.
With that said, I mean, again, I want to talk about the perfect intro, and we'll get to that. But who knows where this conversation will go?
Probably book marketing Kickstarter.
I know. We'll shy away from that because I want to stay on track with the theme of relationships, which again, your expertise just plays into beautifully. So yeah, introductions. How did you, I guess, stumble across this framework? Because it's something that a lot of us struggle with. And actually, one of the episodes I do in season 2 is about how to network at events. And I said one of the things I opened with is that, the whole notion of like introverted or extroverted. Like I consider myself an introvert on some level and ambivert, so I kind of play both worlds. But to me, a more important thing to focus on is like you're either comfortable or you're uncomfortable. So what are some ways that you can kind of stack the cards in your favor and walk into a room being as comfortable as possible? And in any social interaction, you know that you're going to have to, participate in small talk. So what does that look like? You're going to have to introduce yourself. And you're going to have to share a little bit of your story. So those are things you can practice and hone in advance. And introductions, most people don't hone it. And in a social setting where you're like anxious and it's a new environment and you're worried about what people think of you and all that kind of stuff, you end up being nervous, and that nervousness just amplifies how bad your introduction is.
Right.
And you will, most likely, if you're like me, mumble and not be all that clear, maybe use big words, and it's not pretty at all. And first impressions obviously are crucial. So with that said, walk us through the framework, but how did you stumble across this framework?
Yes, stumble is a very good word for it because I stumbled over my own introduction.
You know what, dude? I actually completely forgot about that story.
Yeah.
That's a great place to start. All right.
Yeah, no. So I was in New York City, living in New York in 2013. A friend of mine who lived in the building told me about a conference that she thought I really should go to. And I had the date open, and I love San Diego. I was living in New York, and the conference was in San Diego, and so it wasn't too hard to twist my arm. She just said, don't worry about the content. The people are amazing. The speakers are amazing. You need to be in that room. Just go. Just trust me. So I went, flew to San Diego, Didn't really know much about the conference. It was put on by a mutual friend of ours now named Jim Quick. It was called Superhero U 2013. And I just sat there and enjoyed the first speaker. And then afterwards he said, why don't you turn around and meet the person behind you? So I did. And, he said, so what's your name and what do you do? And I said, well, my name's Clay. And then the next 5 minutes were like just a rambling. I was like trying to catch up to myself, and I think I explained every city I'd ever lived in and my favorite flavors of ice cream and just all this inane detail about my life that was inconsequential and not interesting and rambling. And I could sort of see myself as I was talking. I'm like, what are you doing? Shut up. So finally, after 5 minutes, I stopped myself by saying, okay, so sorry about that. What's your name? What do you do? And I'll never forget exactly what he said and how he spoke it. And what he said was not what became the perfect intro framework, but it was the way that he said it that really inspired me. He said, well, my name is Matt, and I run a little software company. And just cool as Fonzie. And I was like, man, that's cool. I'm into software. I'm into startups. What's it called? Maybe I've heard of it. And I thought it was like some little rinky-dink app or something like that. He said it's called Automatic. And in that moment, I knew who I was speaking to because I knew the founder of Automatic was Matt Mullenweg. And as soon as he said it, then my brain clicked and the coffee kicked in and everything else. And I knew because I recognized who he was after he said that. But he had kind of wet hair. And he's not like Mr. Look at Me online. His Twitter avatar is like a pink square and stuff. And so here I was meeting a guy I considered to be an internet hero of mine. His WordPress that he created that's under the company of Automatic powers 26% of the internet. So 1 out of 4 websites in the world are built on the software that he created. I knew who Matt was, but I didn't know that's who I was talking to until he said that. So there's this photograph that the event photographer took that captured the exact nanosecond that I realized who I was speaking to, and it's as I'm shaking his hand. And we talk about a jaw-dropping moment. My jaw is literally hanging wide open.
I hate to put you on the spot, but I really want to use that for the artwork of this episode.
Oh, sure, 100%.
It is so. I mean, it encapsulates it beautifully.
But you're totally right. And when you said stumble, so I had that interaction. I was like, oh my God, WordPress, Matt. And I was just, then I was fanboying out. So I went from awkwardly talking because I didn't have a great introduction to awkwardly talking because I was fanboying about Matt and everything else. And then, by then the break was over and he gave me this really kind smile. Matt's just the nicest guy in the world. But it was kind of a smile of like, okay, weirdo, don't call me, I'll call you. So I walked away from that interaction thinking I walked the grounds, I skipped the next session, and I thought, you're not an unconfident person. How do you never do that again? How do you at least, and I never thought it would be, a book or a talk or a workshop or anything or a concept or anything. I just said, I don't ever want to feel like I just felt. And also in the moment, that was like the long term. In the moment, I was like, if Matt Mullenweg's sitting behind me, who's to the left of me and to the right of me that I don't recognize?
Sure.
Who else am I going to meet at this conference? And how do I not, I didn't want to do that in 10 minutes, and I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. So I kind of walked away, and so then I went down on Google and stuff. What's funny is why we get introductions wrong. We either never get taught how to do it well, which is very common. To get a driver's license, at least in the States, you have to sit next to some smelly guy and parallel park on a hill and remember to use the emergency brake, and then they give you the little piece of plastic that says you can drive, which, you should have to do that. But we introduce ourselves every day, and we never had to pass tests. We never had to, and nobody ever taught us. Or the one way that we learn, as I started to research and figure this out, is we learn this stupid thing called the elevator pitch, which is a construct that has stuck for some reason. I think it's clever. I think it's easy to remember, but it's really a poor thing. If you think about it, you and I were just in an elevator right now. Nobody likes being pitched. Pitching is just a stupid thing. The concept of the elevator pitch, you can Google it. I would recommend not doing that, but if you get into an elevator, the idea is that you're going to either work for some company or you're going to step into an elevator with Richard Branson, and you need to be able to pitch your idea in 30 seconds before the elevator gets to the 20th floor or whatever. It's just a dumb concept. It never happens in real life, and people for some reason actually learn and practice this thing, and then it never happens. So what I say is, we get asked the question, so what do you do? On average, about 3 times a day, we meet. I did some research, and it says we meet about 3 new people per day on average. And so that actually happens. The elevator pitch never happens. Also, one interesting little riff on the elevator pitch. You're never going to have a better elevator pitch than the very first one ever. So if you ever walk into an elevator, look at the manufacturer. Usually, at least in the U.S., it's Otis Elevator, OTIS, most popular manufacturer of elevators in the U.S. Huge company. The original elevator pitch was a guy named Elisha Otis, who's the namesake of the company. He didn't invent the elevator, but he invented the elevator brake. So elevators had existed for a year or two, and they were very dangerous because if anything happened at the cable, the elevator would plummet to the bottom of the shaft and people would get hurt or die. So he's the first one that came up with a thing where if the cable broke or snapped, the brake would engage and it would only drop a couple feet. And so the original elevator pitch was Elisha Otis, went to New York, huge open-air convention center in New York, and raised up his new invention, 5 stories, and said, cut the cord, and everyone gasped because they thought he was going to plummet to his death, and then his invention, the elevator brake, engaged, and he said, all safe, ladies and gentlemen, took a big bow and got a big round of applause. So that's where the concept of elevator pitch came from, and you're never going to do better than that. So I always say, forget the elevator pitch, ditch the pitch, and just learn how to introduce yourself when someone says, so what do you do?
Ditch the pitch. I just discovered the episode title. I will say, actually, as a quick kind of side note, you are incredible with titles, and I have to give you credit. So Mastermind Dinners, you came up with a subtitle, which I didn't even change. I don't even remember what it was. It was how to connect linchpins, influencers. I don't know what it was. It was good. It was really good. I didn't even edit it. I didn't shuffle words around. I'm like, this is gold. Perfect calendar was actually your word. So we featured that episode in episode 1 or season 1 of the podcast. And I was using, I think it was either the perfect day, which didn't really encompass the exercise or something else. And then, you use the word, you have a similar exercise, and you call it the perfect calendar. And then I wanted to use it and ask you, or I already used it. And then I'm like, oh, yeah, by the way, Clay, you okay with this?
Either one.
So regardless. Great. So thank you for that. You are incredible with names. So, so with that said, what is... I know you have a couple different frameworks.
Yeah.
There's
kind of a base formula, and then there's a few others.
So what's the base formula? Is that the best place to start?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the best place to start might be the 3 myths about introductions. So real quick, the myths about introductions, and this is sort of, I talked about why we get them wrong, is we never get taught, or we get taught this silly thing called the elevator pitch. But the myths are, number 1, that it should be 100% complete. We get sort of taught by our 8th grade English teacher, or we get, creating resumes and things like that. We get taught that it should be complete. And even now when I teach it, even after I show the framework or do the keynote or whatever, someone tries to jam everything in there, right? And if it's complete, it won't be interesting. Myth number 2 is that it should be about you. And interestingly, your intro, even though someone says, so what do you do? It shouldn't be about you. It should be about who you help and why you help them, which is a great way to sort of divert the attention from you. Because when someone asks, what do you do? They're not so much selfish, but they're a little bit self-interested, or they're wondering, is the thing that you do something that could help me or someone I know or someone I love? And myth number 3 is that it should be 100% accurate. And I always, caveat this with, I'm not telling you to outright lie, but what I'm telling you is to make it more interesting and intriguing, because it's the beginning of a conversation. It's not, think of it like the difference between, the MLK I Have a Dream speech is him talking at that many people. That's a speech. When someone says, so what do you do? It's a conversation. It's not you talking at them. That's a mistake I made with Matt Mullenweg. I sat there and talked at him for 5 minutes before I stopped myself. And when I asked him, he said, I run a little software company. That's it, like done, and bat the tennis ball back to me. And so you want to have that back and forth interaction. So by having it not be complete, 100% complete, not worrying about it being 100% accurate, it can be interesting and intriguing. And we'll sort of show some good examples of how to do that, including a lot of folks in the MMT community.
And that completeness, that's really the problem with the elevator pitch when I'm the recipient of that.
Right.
Is they kind of vomit in conversation, and that leaves me with like, well, now what? Now, like, the conversation's gotten,
Totally.
it's a bad place to take it. I mean, and to what you said, with what Matt did, it was very much, it engaged you, kind of pulled you in because you wanted to know more,
right?
Which I know is one of the benefits of this framework. So.
Yeah. So the framework is the base framework. There's a couple different ones, and then your riff, but it's real easy. And if you almost think about each section or each word of this as the visual that might help, because I know we're doing this via audio, is think of it like a slot machine where you pull the old school Vegas slot machine with the bars and the cherries. Each word of this, or each section or each phrase of this, is one of those wheels that spins, and then you want to think about what can that spin to and what can that become. So that's kind of the graphical way to think about it. But the first step is I, and then you don't say I am. You don't say I am a dentist or I am from the IRS. You say I help. So that solves the first myth, which is it's about you. You move it off of being about you, and it's about who you help, which is just a more interesting way to say it. And then down the road, we'll look at all the different ways to customize it. So it's I help, or some version of the word help, and we'll talk about that. And then who it is you help. So who do you serve? Who are your people? Who are your tribe? This could be, if you're a dad or a mom, you could be talking about your kids. So it's I help, and then whoever it is you help. What do you call those people? Or what do they call themselves? And then lastly, whatever result you help them achieve, or what do you help them sort of do or achieve or become. And that's the base framework. That's the end of it. Basically, I, and then help, or some version of the word help, who it is you help, and then whatever you help them do or achieve or become. So I'll use my example just to start. If I'm talking about crowdfunding, if I'm at a place, and this goes to, what room you're going to walk into. You know what your schedule is for the day. You know if you're walking into a conference. What I should have done before going to Superhero U is research the conference a little more, figure out who's going to be there, figure out if I see Matt Mullenweg tweeting about attending, maybe I know that he's going to be there. So one little tip that's not to do with the framework, but just in general, do your research, and you're a master at this. You know everything about everyone before they walk into the room, which is amazing and really helps. But yeah, that's the base framework, and then you kind of customize each piece from there.
So I help, and that help, to what you said, keeping the slot idea.
Yeah, Vegas.
It could be any word in relation to that. Then the who, which is like the customer, and achieve a certain result.
Yeah, what do you help them do or achieve or become? So if you spin the Vegas wheel of help, when I think about you're a super connector. You know everyone, you connect everyone. For some people that are more introverted or don't do that, connect isn't their thing, but maybe they teach. Maybe they love to stand up on stage and teach, or teach via online or webinars. For some people, it's write, expose, connect, any verb. And here's a simple little ninja trick. Don't get too hung up on the exact verb. Come up with something that's close. Or if sometimes this stuff is really hard when we're doing it for ourselves. Ask your 5 closest friends and be like, what's the verb that you say when I do what I do? What would you call that? What's the verb that you would call that? And look at, either what your friends give back, then just punch it into thesaurus.com. Like, there's some really basic tools on the internet that are really useful. Punch it into thesaurus.com, and either the one your friend says will be right, or one of those words. If you typed in connect, the internet will tell you 50 other words that are similar to connect, and one of them is going to feel like a custom suit that fits you perfectly.
So you talked a little bit about context, which I think is one of the things I love most about this, again, with its whole interchangeable kind of nature. And I know you've shared one with me before around the crowdfunding work you do, because, again, you're a man of many hats. I know you're helping a friend of ours right now shoot for the New York Times, so you have a lot of experience in book marketing, crowdfunding campaigns. I mean, how many people have you supported with the crowdfunding campaigns now?
Like 175, like 75 million. Yeah.
And raised 75 million. So that's just another thing in your. So you have a lot of different ways to kind of introduce yourselves, but the one thing I love, again, is the interchangeable kind of nature of this. So can you give us context as far as like how you'd introduce yourself in a group of entrepreneurs versus how you'd introduce yourself in a group of creatives?
Yeah, that's perfect. That's a perfect segue, because if you think about the slot machine wheels, I help or I connect or I lead or I teach. The next part you want to customize is who you help, right? So as you're going to walk into that room. So if I walk into a room of entrepreneurs and I'm talking about crowdfunding, the first 3 words is I help entrepreneurs. And then the last phrase is what result do you help them achieve, or what do you help them do, achieve, or become? And that's fund their dreams. So what's interesting is, I do crowdfunding, and the platforms that people know are Kickstarter and Indiegogo, but the intro doesn't contain any of those words, crowdfunding or Kickstarter or Indiegogo. And that's kind of why it works, because it's a little more interesting, a little more intriguing, a little less specific. But if I'm in a room full of entrepreneurs and they say, what do you do? And again, half of this is the words and the framework, and I know that's what we're talking about, but the other half is the confidence, because when you know the answer to the question before you get asked, you can say it with a whole different level of confidence and panache and shoulders back and everything else. So the phrase is, I help entrepreneurs fund their dreams. And if you say that to a room of entrepreneurs, everyone's pretty interested, because every entrepreneur has dreams and every entrepreneur wants to get those dreams funded. Now, the follow-up questions I get to that are you an angel investor? Are you a VC? What kind of entrepreneurs? What kind of dreams? And what's great about this framework that I sort of figured out accidentally is it doesn't matter what their follow-up question is. The next best thing you want to do after the base framework is you lead them into a story. So you can say, if you want a simple little mnemonic to remember it, just remember that and say, well, let me tell you a story. But after you do it 20 or 50 times, you don't need the let me tell you a story. You just say, well, when Lee Miller first came to me, and what's great is you know it, and you get to tell think of all the transformations you've done and the amazing community you've built with MMT. We all love telling stories of the people that we've helped. And the best way to explain the work that we do is through the transformations that we've done for other people's lives and businesses. And so, and again, this is not something I figured out the day that I blew my intro to Matt Mullenweg. This came like years later after teaching it and learning more. But it gives you the ability to explain what you do through the transformation that you help others do. And like with you, with Connect, right? You could think of lots of examples. Every day, there's a useful, valuable, interesting connection in the world because of the community that you've built. And you're not talking about millions of people, right? Millions of people are not in the MMT community. But every day, there's a dinner or a business deal or a really useful intro or, the active community group and things like that. So, that's what you do. And explaining the color of that is so much more interesting than what most people do. Not what you do, but what most people do, which is I organize an annual event in Napa Valley, like the bullet points of the details, when in fact you can talk about connecting these people and the transformation. So what I would prompt people to do is think of your favorite customer case study, story, etc. What's the one either that had the biggest impact, or the one that maybe it didn't have a massive impact, but it's just a really neat story, or you took someone from A to B, and then reverse engineer what's your I help X achieve Y kind of thing from that story, because you want your intro to be, like I said, confident and intriguing, but you actually want to phrase it in such a way that they go, well, what does that mean? Or how do you do that? Or are you a VC? Like, you don't want it to be that, back to the whole myth about it being complete. If it's fully complete, they can walk away and go get a drink. If it's not complete, it begs well, what do you mean? Or
pulls
how do
it
you
into
do
the
that?
Conversation.
Yeah.
I don't remember you actually using like the story component as the second part. Again, I've been very familiar with the intro framework, and I've honed it kind of significantly over the years. But I love the whole idea of like pulling into a story. Now, one thing I talk about, and I'd love to see if you agree with this as well or not, especially in the context of this, is that like, again, like you're going to have to, because my thing was like, you're going to have to introduce yourself. You're going to have to share some of your story. And for me, like I'll do like, I have like 3 story lengths. I have like a 30-second, 60-second, and 90-second, dependent on like, do I want to keep this conversation going, or is this what, like, depending on the context? Do you agree with that type of model as well, or do you think like just keep it short and succinct and just keep volleying the ball back and forth? Like, what does that look like to you?
Yeah, it's a really great thing. I think what it speaks to is what's the context, because when we get asked, so what do you do, or when we get prompted to explain what you do, it happens in a myriad of different contexts. Often, I don't know how many 15 times. You and I have been sitting around a dinner table with lots of people at one of your mastermind dinners, and people go around, and now you do, I think, a really smart thing, which is you know everyone, and if there's someone you don't know well, you research what they're thinking, and you have their intro, and you go around. So you solve a whole bunch of sort of traditional problems. I actually think that's a really great strategy.
People can't introduce themselves. That's the problem.
Exactly.
Either they talk too long,
or
what we run into most often in our community is people are so humble. They undersell themselves.
Yeah.
Like there's one guy, I won't name him here, but I call this guy out all the time. He's built a business into like the 9 figures in like 4 years, from 0 to 9 figures, just crushing it. I mean, he did a speaking engagement recently, and he's not a speaker, where he was in between Jack Ma and the Prime Minister of Canada.
Oh, yeah, sure. I know who you're talking about.
And I asked him, I'm like, in the intake form for our dinner, I'm like, what's your top business achievement? And he's like, I don't have one. And I'm like, dude, I'm going to kill you. You know what I mean? So somebody like that, like I have to be his biggest fan, because if I ask him to introduce himself, he'd be like, oh, I have a little online business. And I'm like, I'm going to kill you. So
you attract, and you, I think it's really a testament to what you've built with MMT, but you have created a space where these sort of, when we say the word rock star, like business rock star kind of thing, like rock stars are not quiet or shy or humble, right? They're jumping around breaking guitars with no shirt on. And you've attracted all these guys that have, and men and women who've had a ton of success, who don't beat their own drum and everything else. And I think it's a testament to what you've built, that there's a safe space for these amazing entrepreneurs that feel safe sharing, but they still, I love the framework of what you do. So I'll just be really clear, because Jason and I are just chatting. Like at these dinners, at these mastermind dinners, Jason knows everyone, or if there happens to be one or two kind of new folks that he doesn't know, he researches like crazy. And in almost every dinner, people go around and say, oh, introduce yourself. And like you said, you've done it. Give them the guidelines, be like, just do name, rank, serial number, or what city you're from, or what you do, or title, or 10 seconds. It doesn't matter. You get to the 7th guy, and he's just talking for 15 minutes, and people's appetizers are getting cold.
Because he's nervous, and because he doesn't have a framework.
So Jason pre-writes everyone's intro and then actually says it, because there's time for these. The rest of the dinner, they're going to meet each other. And so it's really smart what you do, because you get a better introduction in a shorter period of time. You get to kind of brag and love on everyone else and say how great they are, and be like, he would never tell you this, but which is a really important part of this whole thing, which is when you go to an event with someone else. So there's all these different contexts, and the framework I talk about is best in a one-on-one. If you're sort of one-on-one, or even one-on-two, small group of 3 people at a cocktail party, that kind of thing, where someone's like, so what do you do? Or in a podcast interview or something like that. It doesn't work as well if it's like in a big group, or if you're going around and doing a dinner table, and that's where the different contexts come into play. And I really like what you do at the dinner table. I would recommend anyone who puts together these kind of dinners. It's a little more work for you, or maybe a lot more work for you, but it makes the intro duration a lot shorter and the quality a lot higher. So I really like it.
It's actually not a lot of work. I mean, maybe on some level, because I know everybody intimately for the most part, like I can just riff off the top of my head, like why somebody's so great and all those kind of things. But really, for me, it's like I'm bringing everybody together. I invited everybody there for a reason. I'm just letting everybody know why that person is there. So it's usually pretty easy, and it does create a way better experience. But one thing I want to make sure I don't gloss over this, because I think it's so important, is the confidence piece of having this down packed. Because I mean, you've heard like the breakdown of like how much the importance of like first impressions, and how you only have like a microsecond to like make an impact, and people already make a decision on you and whether you're worth investing in or not.
Right.
Not only financial, but from a time perspective, like if you're worth their time in kind of microseconds, and how much, like, if you're stumbling over your words and you have like terrible posture and you're not confident, how much that affects that first impression versus, because I think it's like 7% of communication is the words you use. The rest is like tonality and posture and presence and all those kind of things.
Right.
So I can't emphasize enough, like even just the importance of that. Like when you have this down packed and you're confident, you've refined it. How it just changes how you walk into a room.
You're totally right. Even just, people talk about the firm handshake, whatever. I definitely have a firm handshake. That's great. But knowing what you're going to say. The example I always use, because we can always remember the dread of, college or high school or staying up late, pulling that all-nighter because you played tennis all semester instead of studying for that, exam, and you're trying to cram a semester's worth of knowledge in your brain at 3 a.m. And usually about 3 a.m. after, a couple Red Bulls and some pizza, you have that illicit thought that, like, God, you wish someone would just slide the test under the door. Because if you just knew the question on the test, then you could study for that question and you would ace it. And yet, we know the question that's going to be on the test today, tomorrow, and for the rest of your life. And that question is, so what do you do? Or some very similar question to that. And yet we know the question on the test and we don't prepare, we don't practice, and we don't say, you know what, I'm walking into a room full of creatives and they see entrepreneurs as like the VC guys down in Silicon Valley. They're actually creatives or makers or whoever they identify as. Again, you can really tweak the context. The nice thing about this framework and the simplicity of it is it's just a few words, and people get hung up on what the perfect one is for them. It's called the perfect intro. Sort of when you and I first started talking, it was called the 6-word intro. But people get hung up on the perfect one for them. And what I tell them is, don't get hung up. You can have an infinite number of these intros. You can have lots of them because we introduce ourselves in lots of scenarios and lots of contexts, like we talked about. And this concept of the slot machine wheel, change entrepreneurs to creatives or moms or CrossFit guys or whatever, and you can tweak this. This gives you a framework for all, because everyone, a lot of the folks, all the folks in MMT and people are amazing and they have depth. And so I'm not trying to cram them into this little Mad Lib box. I'm trying to give them this. The reason I like the slot machine instead of the Mad Lib is you can have an infinite number of things that thing can spin, and you can introduce yourself in lots of different ways because we all have different talents, and now this gives you different ways to introduce those talents.
Now, I know you have different frameworks, but with this specific framework, which is like pretty much the most commonly used framework, I guess, for introduction that you have, you've taught thousands of people this framework.
Yeah,
is this the one that most people use?
This is the base one, and then the one that I say, if it doesn't fit, if you kind of try thesaurus.com or you ask your friends what verb, and you tried a bunch of things and it just doesn't fit, sometimes it has to do with the confidence piece to go back to that. People don't want to say I help or whatever. A fun one to play with is I'm X for Y. Right? So someone, Jim Quick, sometimes says, I'm a personal trainer for your brain. And he is. He people like Elon Musk and Will Smith hire him to do brain training. So he might say, I'm a personal trainer for your brain. And that's interesting, intriguing. It kind of gives me a little bit of context to what he does, but also begs, oh, that's cool. How do you do that? Even if I can picture in my head what a personal trainer for my brain does, is it to do with memory? Is it to do with IQ? And
you somewhat see this framework a little bit, especially in like tech.
Yeah.
Where it's like we are the Uber of.
Exactly. The Uber of X, or like we're Pinterest, but for vampires. Yeah, that kind of thing. I'm X for Y, where X and Y are things.
Pinterest for vampires. You got my
I don't know.
My ADD's kicking in, and while you talk, I'm like, hold on, I'm trying to piece that together.
There was Pinterest for guys was a thing for a while. Like a couple startups tried to do that when they saw the success of Pinterest for women. Of course, a bunch of people tried to do Pinterest for guys. And what's interesting is, they had the great functionality in the buttons. It's just, it didn't work because that's not exactly how guys think, and our brains are a little bit different. But I'm X for Y. One of my favorites is actually a guy here in LA, Simon Manwaring. He runs a really cool branding agency here in LA. And his is, I'm like Pulp Fiction. I'm like the wolf from Pulp Fiction, but for brands. And what's interesting about that one is it's super specific. And a bunch of people have seen Pulp Fiction, but a whole bunch of people haven't.
I haven't, yeah.
And it allowed people to be like, oh, that's not a good intro because most people haven't seen Pulp Fiction. It actually allows him to do the follow-up in a really interesting way. He say that, and then by reading your face really quickly, he'll know, because people who've seen the movie and know the wolf, know the scene he's talking about, will instantly, their eyes will get big and they'll be like, oh, cool, what does that mean? Or if they have in any way a blank or puzzled stare, he'll be like, so you maybe haven't seen Pulp Fiction? Well, in Pulp Fiction, and then his story isn't so much of a client that he's helped transform, but it's this amazing story. So he's literally telling the story of this super popular Quentin Tarantino movie, and this scene where, they call Harvey Keitel and he saves Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta from having a dead body in the back seat. And then he goes, so that's what I do. If you're a brand and you've got the equivalent of a dead body in your back seat, I can help get you out of that jam. And you really understand what Simon does through that story. So I'm X for Y, where X and Y are things that they understand, but but that are not necessarily always paired like that.
So let's talk about, I guess, three things. One, I'd love to get some examples. I mean, we shared a few, but if you have more that you can kind of share just to get people's kind of gears spinning. And then the second thing that I'm really interested in is the refinement of it, because that's one thing I've realized, especially when sharing my story, is I've refined it significantly over the years by watching body language, by sharing it in a setting and then seeing, are people leaning in, interested? Are they pulling back and uninterested? Are they bored? Are they lost? Those kind of things. So would love to know, how one refines their perfect intro.
Right, absolutely. So a few examples, then we'll talk about how it's refined. Our really good mutual friend Joey Coleman, he's got this.
I saw Joey like 2 days ago.
Did you?
Dude?
Nice.
Yeah. So. I'll leave it in the podcast. I don't care.
Yeah,
Joey, because I'll have Joey on season 3.
Awesome.
So he has a book coming out called
Never Lose a Customer Again.
That's coming out in April.
Correct.
Which is actually when the release of this episode will be. So go buy the book. Actually, I'm going to do a little plug right now. So Joey, one of my closest friends, he actually, when I started MMT, I didn't know any speakers. So Joey was the only speaker I knew. So I had a few phone calls with him. I'm like, how do you navigate this? How do I get speakers? What do they look for? Those kind of things. So he was crucial from an advisory perspective. And then on some level, as a thank you, I'm like, you can come speak at the event as well.
Sure.
Not knowing that, the model for our events was the best talkers voted by the audience would win $25,000. And, our first event we had, Tim Ferriss, Ryan Holiday, some former TED speakers, Lewis Howes, just a slew of people. And Joey was competing in that group of folks. Not only did he win the event for the best talkers voted by the audience, he had twice the amount of votes of the second place winner.
Landslide.
He totally crushed it. So he's one of by far the best speakers I've seen. His philosophies around like the first 100 days, if you get that first 100 days of the customer's life cycle right, you'll have a customer for life. That's fundamentally, there's two things I can point to that have really shifted the way I look at business, and that is definitely one of them. And I've known him since 2011.
Yeah.
His book has been 8 years in the making. It's finally happening.
Yeah.
So it's coming out in April. So be sure to check that out.
And we designed some really fun bulk packages for multiple books. The more books you buy, the more fun stuff you do. We did kind of you see it a lot with book launch stuff and Kickstarter and things like that. But we made it fun where if you're interested in more than one book or to get ones for clients, you can get more Joey and more fun things and goodies and things like that.
So I don't even know how we talked about you brought them up, and I just want to rant. So
the example of an intro. So
yes.
One thing he can say is, I help companies keep their customers. So it's fairly complete, but you don't really know how they do that, right? And there's lots of different ways he could sort of riff or customize that. Another thing is all the different places where these intros live. We talked about different contexts, like one-on-one or dinners or things like that. Your email signature, everyone uses this to update their social media bios. If you look at Dan Martell's, he says, I help entrepreneurs build technology products that change the world.
Update your LinkedIn.
Great. Yeah, Twitter, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. Yeah. And Joey has it right on his website. It says, Joey helps companies keep their customers.
Yeah.
And so one piece I don't want to forget is the last part of that. So if you want to use this, if you go through this framework and you want to use it to have a much better headline and tagline on your website, the last part of it. So I'll use I help entrepreneurs fund their dreams. Take the last 3 words, fund their dreams, and then flip it from there to because when someone comes to your website, they're interested in what you or your website or services or offerings or products can do for them. So I flip it around to fund your dream, or if you take that up a level, verb your noun. So Joey could update his headline to say, keep your customers. That's really what they care about, right? Or live your legend was a guy, Scott Dinsmore, passed away, right? Yeah. Verb your noun. That's really because it takes away they're on your website. You don't need to say I or me or your name or anything else. You can just say sort of verb your noun. So it's worth thinking about what's the noun that your customer wants verbed, right? Yeah. They want their dream funded, or what's the thing, right? Elevate your brand could be for a marketing or branding agency. It's a really simple little thing. And from there you can play with it and customize it, but I just didn't want to miss. It's
No,
a
dude,
great way
that's
because everyone
awesome.
hates writing copy for their headline for their website and
Yeah.
everything else. It's a great little shortcut.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as I made mention, I mean, there's people who've done this or utilized this framework and refined it and have trademarked, the end result. And I smiled because my gears are spinning as far as we're redesigning our website now.
Perfect. Let's
And-
do it.
And we'll riff about that offline. So those are the two kind of frameworks. It's I help,
Yep.
which can be interchanged, customer or the who,
And then that
achieve
can be
a certain
interchanged.
result.
Yep.
And all those are really interchangeable. And then the other one is I am X for Y.
Yeah, or I'm X for Y, or I'm like X for Y, right? Like I'm like Red Bull for X or whatever, right? Now and then the website headline one being sort of verb your noun, or start from there, right? And the contexts are different because like on your social media bios, you probably do want to do the whole full like I help, right? Like Dan Martell, I help entrepreneurs build technology products that change the world. But if Dan had a website, he might just say change the world, right? Or verb your noun, right? Or build your app or build your dream or whatever. Another thing to remember, I'm not a copywriter, but one of the rules of copywriting is the job of a headline is to get them to read the subheadline.
Yeah.
If they look at the big font and then they read the thing in the smaller font, the big headline like can grab its lunch pail and go home because it did its job for the day. And I think we, just like our intros, we try to cram too much and too many words into that. And the verb your noun it's not magic. It's just a great, simple place to start. And then from there, usually people come up with better ones on their own.
Yeah, no, I love it. I mean, I think it was Gittimer who said that does your business card start a conversation or end it?
It's great.
And the same thing in regards to introduction. Does your introduction start a conversation or does it ultimately end it? And I can think of times where I've ended conversations because I've just, again, vomited like what I do and all that kind of stuff. And then you reach that point where, like, as soon as you say that last word, there's like this silence and like neither of you know what to do or say next.
Yeah.
So I've done that. I've also been on the recipient end of that. So I know, I mean, I'm a huge fan of this framework. So,
Yeah.
and I love the website copy spin to it. I've never thought about that. So
Yeah. And some more examples from the community, Doug Brackman, Doug and Randy teach people,
His is great.
We teach people how to, so I want to touch on that too. If you're talking about yourself as a person, you might use the pronoun I. And if you're talking about your company, it's real simple. You just flip it to we. So, Doug might say, we teach people to meditate at gunpoint. And as you and I know from doing it together, they teach people how to meditate using a sniper rifle at a very safe gun range and everything else. But when they say teach people how to meditate at gunpoint, it's kind of clever. Like, what do you mean you point a gun at them and make them meditate? That seems like the worst way to meditate. It's impossible to not follow that up with, what do you mean by that? And then they get to kind of explain their story. So have fun with it, make it interesting. And then the practice, to your point about customizing it, the practice is, it's going to feel a little bit uncomfortable. There's going to be a little bit of tension, but in all great sales conversations and things like that, there's a little bit of tension. Play with that tension. You don't want to do something that feels completely inauthentic, but Doug's a pretty straightforward, pretty serious guy, and I've seen him deliver it. We teach people to meditate at gunpoint. And he's got that kind of wry smile because he knows, like, when you know the question on the test, you can say it with a certain confidence.
Yeah.
And people are like, what does that mean? And then he gets to explain it. So this is just a way to get into a better story about explaining what you do.
And would you recommend, like, if people are listening, to maybe get into a group of like 3 or 5 friends and just hash out a bunch of different ideas?
Yeah, if you can role play it, that is a great way to do it. And yeah, if you get 3 or 5 friends, but then make each a little test a one-on-one role play. So there's like 3 audience members and 2 people trying it, because the content you're going to get. So what do you do one-on-one or one-on-2 as often as anything else? And like I said, the way you would answer that question if there was a group of 10 people, you don't do the perfect intro in that way. You do it a little bit differently, because it's odd to have it's not odd to have that back and forth tennis kind of conversation when it's one-on-one or even one-on-2, but like you said, at a dinner or if it's 1-on-10. So definitely role play, practice it, do what feels good. If anyone wants to, totally welcome. There's a free Facebook group where we all help each other and riff, and all the rules and stuff are in there. Anyone who wants to is welcome to join that, and it's fun because people, it's obviously a pretty simple framework to learn, but the nuanced practice and things like that, and people will go in there and post, here's my latest one, and comments and things like people will help them out. So that's great.
And that is where it was a perfect intro?
Yeah, the perfect
Facebook?
intro on Facebook should be a group, and you'll see my embarrassing picture of shaking hands with Matt Mullenweg as the cover. And if you can't find it, let us know, and we'll get you there.
And the one thing I want to add before I let you go is also I've had friends who have raved about the importance of getting their team on board for not only participating in the brainstorming of like what that thing is, but once everybody, like so many times, if you have 100 employees, you know, I know so many people who they ask them like what they do, and they fumble in those kind of things. So if they have a clear understanding of, well, like again, very kind of clear and concise what the company does or what they do within that company, it's just you have more, you know, word of mouth going out there in the marketplace.
The numbers stack up so quickly. So let's take a company, let's just say it has 100 employees. Well, so we already established that you introduce yourself about 3 times a day. So now you're talking, you know, 3 times a day times 100 employees times 365 days a year. And that doesn't even count, you know, website interactions and email signatures and everything else.
Yeah.
If your company has 1,000 employees, you're talking about, you know, so many thousands of introductions every single year. And so, yeah, it works great for companies and to get everyone, because obviously it's a fairly simple framework, but it quickly leads to a very different set of words or introduction for everyone. But then I highly recommend, work with your company, do it, and have everyone practice, because and CEOs love it, right? This is they understand that if they have 1,000 employees, that really impacts how many times people are out there asking their employees, so what do you do? And they know their employees don't have a good answer because they don't have a good answer, and it really the math stacks up really, really quickly. So yeah, you're right. It's a great thing for companies to do.
Dude, I just smile looking at you because we could talk about book publishing, book marketing,
Topo Chico.
Crowdfunding, this. You have your hands in so many different like little projects, and you have all these little nuggets of wisdom in so many different industries. But yeah, I mean, that I love the framework. I got a lot out of this as well. Again, especially the website one, because I'm working on a website. So maybe we'll riff on that offline.
Do you want to do it right now? Should we come up with the headline for your website right now, live on the pod?
Let's do it.
All right,
let's do it.
All right. Which website you have? Like,
so it's for Mastermind Talks.
Okay.
Maybe it could be community made, but like So for Mastermind Talks, and my it used to be 6-word intro, and then if you're lucky, sometimes you can hone it and make it smaller. So mine is I connect fascinating entrepreneurs.
Yep.
And sometimes I'll throw in like through unique experiences depending on the context. But so yeah, that doesn't necessarily. Well, I guess what are some things that come top of mind for you as far as like?
So if we start with the verb your noun framework, and I think about Mastermind Talks and the conference and the community, what about find your tribe?
Yeah, that's actually the first thing that
is that.
Yeah, well, that was the first thing that came to mind when you were talking about this as a framework. That was like, it wasn't a play necessarily of like I connect fascinating entrepreneurs. It was something a little different.
Sure.
But yeah, I was thinking of something along those lines as well.
The neat thing about Find Your Tribe for you is it sort of automatically opts in or opts out, because right after Find Your Tribe, you explain who the community is made up out of.
Yeah.
And obviously you run an amazing event, amazing community, but it's not for everyone, just like nothing is for everyone.
Sure.
And so Find Your Tribe, the job of the headline is to get them to scroll and keep reading or play the video or whatever.
Yeah.
And you do such a good job with all the other marketing assets, like the post-event video, where you watch that video, it's impossible not to know, is that your tribe or is that not your tribe, right?
Yeah.
They may not make the cut, but they know whether they want to be part of that crowd or not, right?
Yeah.
So I think that can be really simple. The question is, would Find Your Tribe get them to either read the subheadline or play the video? I think it would.
Yeah.
I mean, you could certainly play with it, but that's as simple as the verb your noun, can be.
Yeah, that's the first one that popped into my head initially. So, shit, that was easy. God, this framework's good.
You already had it done.
All right, brother. Well, thank you so much for making this happen, because I know we've been trying to schedule it. And as I made mention offline, you were the first person I was really thinking I had to do like the whole Skype interview, because my rule is
nobody wants to come to San Diego, Jason.
Only do things in person. I told you I want to bring you back to Toronto, but I appreciate you hopping on a train, and
of course
6 hours on a train, or probably 7 hours on a train today just to do this interview. I really appreciate it.
Anytime, brother.
All right, my man. So that is it for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for listening. As mentioned earlier in the show, Clay shared a few templates that you can leverage to design and refine your own introduction. With that said, those templates can be found in the Community Made group in the resource section. If you're not a member, joining the group is free. No excuses. Simply visit communitymade.com to get access. And a second quick side note, as I made mention as well at the beginning of the episode, I decided to take some of the concepts from this season on how to grow, nurture, and amplify your business relationships and go deep in an intimate, workshop setting, and decided to put it out to the world on Facebook, and it sold out within the first day and a half. So announced a second date. So for the date and availability of that workshop, visit superconnectorworkshop.com. Again, that's superconnectorworkshop.com. If you enjoyed this episode, show some love to Clay by maybe taking a screenshot of your podcast app and ping him on Twitter or Instagram at Clay Hebert. That's ClayHebert. For more details on Clay, visit crowdfundinghacks.com or clayhebert.com. Before I go, I got to give a quick shout out to Melissa C. for leaving the following review on iTunes. She said, Community Made is a fascinating look into Jason's world, a balancing act of wisdom, strategy, knowledge, and vulnerability. This may be a podcast about business, but it is also truly a conversation about life, a great mix of thoughtful questions, contrarian thinking, and actionable steps for growth. I actually didn't read this testimonial of sorts before, so thank you very much for this. Only 4 episodes in, and I'm absolutely looking forward to what's coming next. So thank you so much for the rating and the review, Melissa. For the rest of you out there, if you enjoyed this episode of the podcast and like what we're doing here at Community Made, I'd be forever grateful if you would share this podcast with a friend or leave us an honest review on iTunes or Facebook, just like Melissa did. Join me for the next episode of Community Made, where I sit down with the great, I love this woman, Vanessa Van Edwards.
Your context of how you meet people at a conference is really important. So it's not just showing up. It's actually, there's microcosms of connections within a conference. I have been able to build a lot of relationships with speakers or mentors just by being not the most excited person in the room, but being the most attentive person in the room.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I can't wait to host you on the next episode of Community Made. I'll see you then.